My name is David Yun, and welcome to my Viewfinder. This is a podcast where I speak to photographers about why they shoot, as opposed to what they shoot with. My hope is to produce inspiring content to get you out there looking at the world creatively. Each episode will end in a thought or project to help bring this to the fore, so make sure you get to the end and interact with me. If you're interested in continuing this project with me, you can help me out by clicking subscribe and leaving me a review on your podcast platform of choice. You can also find me on Instagram at My Viewfinder Podcast. I'm on Twitter at MVF Podcast, or you can email me directly at mvfpodcast@gmail.com. This week, I continue my talk with Rocio Graham. We discuss her experiences with her recent project in self-portraiture and discovering her spiritual roots. We also dive into her experiences with representation in Calgary and what she believes is a different experience even within the BIPOC community. That people of color that were born here have their own advantages versus people who are just entering the country. Let's find out more of what she believes, and here's the conclusion of my talk with Rocio. When you talk about how people are interacting with the work, and I think this is not just for this project, but in general, what would you say is the most important or the most authentic way to get real criticism and real conversation? So for example, what do you look for to get a feeling that, let's say, the general public and not just a curator, I don't want to say get it, because that's a very narrow thing, because nobody needs to necessarily be in your head, but to tell what they're experiencing. I just bring that up because I do find it difficult in any of the projects that I get around to get a lot of critical opinion. There's not a lot of people that'll tell you that you're full of shit to your face. How do you grow through these processes? Do you have, what's the feedback loop that you can keep evolving as opposed to getting stuck in this idea that, getting 100 likes on Instagram means you're doing well, right? So
yeah, and you know what? And Instagram is very it's an awesome tool. It has allowed me to meet amazing people and develop relationships with people that otherwise I would not, kindred spirits, I would call it, but it's so curated and so mediated. I try to write as honest as I can, as I would write to, my best friend. And so I try to, what I post there is the stuff that I will, tell my friend, except that I don't use the F word as much as I usually use it in my personal life. So that's the only censor thing that I do there. But I find it that I feel that I'm very lucky though, because I have connections, very candid connections with a few artists, people who I can ask them and I say, hey, I'm doing this, what do you think? And they will literally tell me, oh, well, you can't, I don't know, you're trying to say this, but I'm not so sure that that's what is actually projecting, or they will be like, oh my gosh, she's amazing, right? So I have these friends that sort of keep me honest, for lack of a better word. I think I have a good community of people that I can just bounce back and forth, having those close connections with people. And I'm having constantly these conversations with these people. And we talk about all sorts of things. They talk about their artwork. I talk about my artwork. And because we both, or all these people, we all want to be, we want the other person to develop their practice. And we know that just saying oh my gosh, you're so beautiful, it doesn't really serve them. So it's the same for me. Someone asks me, especially someone who I know that can take a candid opinion, I'll give it. I'll just say, hey, you know what? This is working, this is not working. Or you say one thing, but what you see is something different. Or oh yeah, I don't know. I think it's important to have that community to keep you enriched. And you need to be humble and be open enough to consider whatever you hear. And some of the things that you consider that you're hearing might be very helpful on some of the stuff. And that's the difficulty. How do you know what to listen to? And sometimes, I would have someone saying like, well, I think that maybe this direction will be better. It will make the work stronger. And then my gut just is like, no, that's not what I mean. And so at the end of the day, I have to trust my gut. And so if my little belly is telling me that that's not my thing, then I trust that.
How much has that voice changed over the years? your gut voice.
A lot. But I have to say, I'm the worst critic. Like, I have to say, even this body of work, I would say probably only 2 images. I'm okay with them. But I create an image and I'm super excited about it. And 2 weeks later, I already hate them. I'm like, could have done so much better. Like, what was I thinking? I could have done this and I could, light it this way and I could focus here in my depth of field and all these technicals. And I can just go on and on with the technical things that I could fix in my images. And in the past, I actually have a lot of body of work. Because I'm quite productive in terms of creating, I have so many bodies of work that had never seen the light because they never made it past my critical eye. And I was like, that's one of the challenges for me, is to stop myself and be like, okay, you know what? Just put the work out there. People either will, engage with it or they won't. And that's okay, And so I'm slowly giving myself that permission.
This is a message from one of our sponsors, Rumi. Cold drafts, flickering lights, and where's that leak coming from? If you've ever wondered what's really going on in your home, Rumi's Ask a Home Inspector service can help. Connect with a certified professional home inspector by phone or video call and get those questions answered. Rumi will let you know what's easily fixable with a little DIY or when you might need to call in some professional help. Visit rumi.ca, that's RUMI.ca, and book your Ask a Home Inspector appointment today. So you brought up a little bit about, let's say, the nuance of self-portraiture. I mean, what would you say is the biggest difference between taking photographs of compost and taking photographs of yourself?
It's so complex. Let me tell you, the biggest challenge for me is because I'm by myself and I have to calculate the distance where I will try to focus my camera in a certain point where I will imagine that that's where I'm going to be standing, and making sure that the depth of field is proper, that I'm, have good focal points, and then, put the timer, run with head decorations and body things, wait for the timer and do that, and then go and check, and then realize like, oh, my face is blurry, or this is blurry, or like whatever. So that's the biggest challenge, because it's so more instant as opposed to my organic compositions. I can control it more, and I can, they're not moving, they're static. So I can control the camera better, and the lighting too, right? And so because I'm using natural light mostly, I could use the strobes, but I've chosen not to. Anyway, so that is very technically complex. The one with me in the water was awful. For that one, that image of me, I call it the Ophelia, but it's not the Ophelia. It's like book number 3, and I'm floating in water, and I couldn't do it by myself. There was no way I could do it without any assistance. So for that one, I had my friends coming for a weekend in the summer. Actually, that was done on my birthday. And I was like, it has to happen now, because I need someone to help me get into the water and making sure that the camera doesn't fall into the pond. So my friends were my assistants that day, and then it was very chaotic, right? So having someone just like throw flowers at me right now, and then someone holding me on the toe as I'm floating, and then trying to make sure that there's no water in my nostrils, and the timer is going, and like make sure the camera doesn't fall. So my friends helped me with that one, and otherwise no way I could actually have done it. That was actually really, really challenging. But also it was a lot of fun. It was a lot of stuff happening that day. So yeah, it was great to, and I kept thinking like, I need assistance. I need someone who, like can help me with dress and helps me carry this. But I'm not there yet. So
did you find any sort of experiential difference being behind and in front of the camera? I mean, obviously there's going to be quite a different thing. But from a mindset perspective and building this project, would you say that there's something that stood out to you that was either a hurdle you had to overcome, or what was it like to be on both sides? Like, I don't like getting my picture taken, never mind taking my own picture. So I mean, I don't know if that's ironic or just natural as a photographer, but I mean, where were you in that space? How was it?
Photographers that I know, everybody that I know that is a photographer hates having their picture taken, which is why we're photographers. We get to control that device pointed at other people instead of pointing at us. So for me, again, that was part of the reclaiming and that was facing my own fears. Like every other human in the planet, I'm self-conscious about certain things, about how I look in camera or how people see me or whatever. So it was very vulnerable. I had to really be okay with that. And that was for me the most vulnerable work I'd ever done, even from that perspective, right? Like it's just showing yourself and taking a space. And I think that was actually one of the things that I wanted to overcome. I wanted to overcome that fear of taking visual space. So by putting myself out there, I was forcing to confront that. And so it was really good. I highly recommend it to everyone. Like, if you really hate having your picture taken, do self-portraits.
Dress up in leaves. I'm just imagining how different it must have been, like the first day that you took your own photograph, like the first frame, which you probably didn't like, to having your friends throwing you in a pond and watching you do this process and being a part of it. I mean, that has to be such a fundamentally different mindset and experience. It's
yes. And you know what? I would say, like, if it wasn't because it was Daryl and Jordan, if it wasn't for them, no way I would have let anybody do that. I like to work solo, just in general. I get into my groove, I get into my mind. And when there's other people there's other energies, and it just changed my way of working. But Daryl and Jordan are very, very, very trusted friends. And so the fact that I'm there naked with a dead snake in my chest and flowers, and they're seeing me as I'm like looking like a beach whale trying to come out of the water, and rolls of skin coming and boobs flapping and snakes coming, Daryl had to hold a dead snake and put it in my chest and run away. And anyway, it was it was very. After that, I was like, okay, we're friends for life. You're seeing everything, and you are seeing me doing the craziest things. So yeah, we're friends for life.
It's fascinating. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, we've kind of touched about this idea of representation and agency. I do remember during the summer there were a lot of different events that were going on, which were making you feel like the idea. I mean, Calgary is a unique thing. I mean, I bring up that you're from Mexico because, I think Calgary in particular has in Canada, I mean, it's very white. And I think that there's a strong tone, the way that people expect each other to behave and what they give to each other, etc. So, your experience is growing as an artist and getting representation here and getting your voice and your experience out. I know that the last year, as far as our conversations, has been one that is also eye-opening in a, I guess, political sense. So without going into sort of politics, how does your ability to be creative and to express yourself, in this case visually, help you deal with your experiences there? I think if we're talking about blending yourself with flowers and dead snakes. I mean, I think there's a message there, but how do you find that you're able to deal with where you find yourself today as an artist in Calgary?
First of all, everything is political. We can't get away from that. It's a fantasy when we say, oh no, I don't want to get political. Everything, our choices, the brand of cereal that you choose in the morning is political. The type of gas that you put in your car is political. So everything that we do has that political connection to, because we are making decisions based on our political beliefs. Based on your political beliefs, that's the school that your kids go to school to. That's the type of clothes that you wear. So I think it's a fantasy that we cannot be political. Everything is political. And yes, in terms of talk and representation and self-agency, I think Calgary is actually quite diverse. The systems that, particularly the art systems, have been traditionally white. That's the difference. The art systems have not necessarily served reflected the true diversity of the city, because the diversity, I see it everywhere. Just get into the train, you see that diversity right there. You might not see the diversity in Melville Park, but you definitely see it. Get on the train, in the C train, and it's right there. I think what has happened, and obviously we have to acknowledge that the Black Lives Matter movement, I was going to say, what word to use? Ignited. It has been ignited. It's just that this particular year, we rekindle. I think I like the word rekindle, because that conversation has been happening for many, many decades at different stages with different agency levels. But that conversation has got rekindled in terms of representation. And I think, it's just reminded us that we have to continue taking a space, and we have to continue advocate for diverse systems that truly reflect the diversity of our society. And I think that, I've been doing a lot of activism in my community with marginalized artists, either through the mental health arts, a section that I am very involved, but also with organizations like Spanish Arts, where, I keep telling my fellow Latin artists, it's like, you have to take space. You can't wait for someone to offer that space. And when I mean taking a space starts by representing yourself the way you are, which is how I'm representing myself this year. I have chosen very consciously to represent myself with a lot of my history in Indigenous rituals, with a lot of mysticism. So there's a lot of, mystical references in my work, my latest work. And that was conscious, because I do not want to tame down. I'm going to use an analogy of the Mexican food. I am not going to serve you, Tex-Mex, Santa Fe, watered down salsa for your liking. I'm done with that. If you want to eat at my table, you're going to eat what I'm getting you. And I'm giving you the whole chimichanga with the whole real, deal. And so that's the analogy that I did. And that for me, that's a permission. And it's not, I don't want to say it in a very condescending way. I say it in a very loving, because I also think that by me being authentic in my work and in my background and how I present myself through my art, it's not just about me. It's also a gift to the traditionally white community. I mean, like the art systems. So it's a service for them, for those systems, to be myself, because it makes the whole art systems richer. So that's how I see it. I think it's just not honest, but I think it's a gift. It's a gift to our society, and it gives permission to others to be themselves.
Just a quick follow-up. Do you find, I don't know specifically who's been in the Latin art community that you've been in touch with, but do you find that we talked a little bit in our Exposure Studio talks about displacement and colonial this and that. Do you see a difference between you coming from Mexico and having grown up in a specific culture versus, let's say, a Canadian who was born here and doesn't have that root, and how they might express something like what you're talking about? How have you experienced how they're trying to represent themselves? And is it better, to say that I'm Canadian, or is it better to say that my parents are from, or my grandparents are from, therefore I ought to be? Do you have any experience with the people that you've been in contact with about that?
It's interesting that you mentioned that, because I had this conversation twice this past week. And actually, I had this because I'm putting together some art programming. And I did a list of recommendations of artists who I think they would be a great fit to show resilience, and particularly from a BIPOC perspective. However, one of the things that I noticed in my programming is that most of the BIPOC artists that we were including, they were artists who have been born in Canada, but there are visible minorities, and they have, the challenges that BIPOC communities face. So I reviewed my list and included artists who were only BIPOC, who are doing a lot of amazing resilience work, but also that there were immigrants, because there are nuances between the born BIPOC artists and the immigrant artists, substantial. And just from the get-go, like even language accessibility, that can be a barrier. When you're not able to communicate your ideas, you lost the public right there. And also not knowing what are the systems that they support. For me, I came to Canada 17 years ago. It's only in the last 5 years that I figured out how the system works. It took me a long time for me to understand that I could apply for a grant, that the grants actually existed, that there's a lot of supports for doing our work and presenting our work, which is one of the reasons why I'm doing the work that I do. I call it closeted activism, in terms of trying to change that, to make those systems more visible for immigrants, for people who, they still haven't figured out how the whole thing works, especially when they speak another language or where they're still struggling with the language barrier. So yes, there is a huge nuances, and I cannot tell people how they should represent themselves, because that's their choice. That's their agency. I don't think that one thing is right, and I don't think that one thing is wrong, but it's definitely, the difference is real. In terms of what I see with recent immigrants, I know a lot of artists who have only been in Canada for 5 years. They behave and they do their art practice very differently than a born Latin American artist per se. Fundamentally different. And they are inherited benefits or inherited privileges of having been born in this country. 100%. We can't deny that. And in the art system right now, what I see is that many times they want to do the tokenism and they want to show representation. And the first layer of scheming is always like the born Canadians, marginalized artists. That's the first scheme. Arts organizations, they struggle sometimes to go a few layers down into how they can actually be truly accessible, or find those people that their voices, they need to be also represented, to dig deep from the surface. And I understand why, arts organizations, sometimes they don't have the systems in place, they don't have this financial backing, or sometimes if themselves in the board of directors or in the staff, there's not enough diversity, it's easy to stay at the surface level. But I think that's something that we are all hopefully more conscious of. And we try to explore that from a, deeper perspective. And that's my hope. So yes, there's a fundamental difference. What is right, what's wrong? I'm not here to comment on that.
Well, yeah, right and wrong is always a dangerous dichotomy. Yeah.
Yeah, and goes back to my philosophy of how I conduct my art practice and how I conduct myself as an artist is the what if, what happens. So for me, it's not like I don't have necessarily a definite answer on that. It's just like, what happens if you involve recent immigrants artists? What happens if you reach out to certain communities that they haven't been, represented as often as other ones? What happens? And that's the question. What happens? What happens when we change the way we do things?
Yeah. I mean, I guess we'll have to see.
Exactly. So that's what I'm doing right now. I'm doing this work with the philosophy. What happens? Let's see what happens.
I think that's the fundamental basis of creativity itself. I mean, how else can we build anything, if not new, at least different, if we don't ask that question? This episode of My Viewfinder is brought to you by the Calgary Foundation, proudly supporting community needs for 65 years. Empathy, kindness, generosity. We are united in our desire to give, to inspire hope, and transform the lives of people who are struggling in turbulent times. And the Calgary Foundation is here to help. From mental health programs to environmental causes, the Community Knowledge Center website features profiles of charitable organizations, all searchable by area of interest. Be inspired by compelling stories. Be informed of innovative work. Be responsive to the needs. To connect to hundreds of outstanding charitable organizations serving our community, visit ckc.calgaryfoundation.org. To learn more about the Calgary Foundation, visit calgaryfoundation.org. So there you have it. Those are Rocio's thoughts. What about you? I don't know if you're listening to this as a minority or part of the majority, but have you taken some time to dig deep into the experiences each individual may have working in the creative field? Not just here in Calgary, but anywhere in the world. Have we thought about how even within minorities there are other minorities? The slippery slope leads into a deep well. No specific photography projects today. I think instead I'll just leave you with that thought. And honestly, it's not even just about people too. How we approach all of our subject matter becomes a reflection of where we're at, both positively and negatively. Developing a way to dive deeper into this is the basis of all art. For us, we just do it with our cameras. There's so much more work we can do to keep picking at this issue that divides us. And perhaps as we become more and more creative, we can even discover ways to bring us together. If there's one thing you could tell the world, what would it be?
Well, it's interesting though, because I think, I wrote it here. I would tell the world the biggest battles and the biggest struggles are not with others, but with ourselves. And I believe that if we manage to break through our limiting beliefs, the stories that we tell ourselves, I think we can do anything. And I think that will be truly peace if we realize that the battle is not with the world. The battle is not with others. The battles are inside. Figure those ones out and then you live a very peaceful life.
I'll agree with that. I think it's very optimistic. So it's end on a good note.
Yes.